video games. Unlike 30 years ago, when they were only enjoyed by arcade junkies, children, and total dorkwads, the gaming industry now pulls in more than the movie and music industry combined. Clearly, the medium of interactive art was something we were all craving. But gamers are far from a monolith, and that's why gaming backstories are wicked interesting to me. When I was a little baby man, my father came home with a Nintendo 64 and introduced me to the world of video games. And it made little to no impact. See, my little baby man hands were not very dexterous, so no matter how hard I tried, I could never get better at Diddy Kong Racing despite my best efforts. But then, my world was turned upside down when I received a Game Boy Color with 2 games. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, a fairly decent Final Fantasy clone, and Pokémon Silver. Now, unlike Diddy Kong, Harry Potter and my buddy Cyndaquil could be leveled up, and I could learn new strategies to get better. The dexterity of my baby man hands didn't even come into play because the combat was turn-based. Now, I love Pokémon. A lot. I care more about the fate of the GS ball than I do about certain family members. Then I fell off around Gen 3, and I've come back and forth through the years, but those first 3 generations I know like the back of my hand. Pokemon Mania is an unstoppable force to this day. That little yellow rat has pulled in an estimated $92 billion. And yet, someone was lost in the mix. A forgotten hero of yore. I'm of course talking about Red. Now, for anyone who isn't a Pokemaniac, Red is the protagonist of the first generation of Pokemon games, and the post-game final boss for the second generation of Pokemon games. And then we never see him again, apart from a brief cameo in Generation 7 and in Black and White and his appearances in the Super Smash Bros. Games. But for the purposes of this video, those don't count, because what I want is a story-based sequel to the Game Boy Color games, starring our boy Red. But before we can think about Red's sequel, we should talk about him. Now, there are several adaptations of Red's journey: Pokemon Red and Green and Blue in Japan, Pokemon Red and Blue everywhere else. Not Pokemon Yellow, that's a reskin of Red and Blue where you play as Ash Ketchum, not Red. And they are not the same guy, probably, I think. There's also Pokemon Origins anime and the Pokemon Adventures manga, but generally, the story goes something like this. Red is an 11-year-old little fella from Pallet Town. He's got a snarky rival whose name might be Blue, or it might be Green, but he's turquoise to be sure. And the turquoise boy's grandpa is a Pokemon scientist named Professor Oak, who gives Red and Turquoise their first Pokemon at the start of the game. Red goes one town over, picks up a custom Pokeball for Oak, so Oak gives him the Pokédex to catch and catalog all 151 at the time Pokemon. Red sets out to complete his Pokédex, wins 8 gym badges to qualify to challenge for the Pokemon Championship against the Elite Four, and has the adventure of a lifetime. He fights the mob, he hangs out on a boat, he even frees the soul of a dead Pokemon from purgatory so that she can pass on to the afterlife instead of haunting a tower for the rest of time. It's a lot for an 11-year-old protagonist. So it's no surprise that we find out, in the second generation of Pokemon games, that after Red became Pokemon League champion, he became a weird mountain hermit for a few years. Really let that sink in. If you're a different age than me, think about your favorite childhood video game protagonist becoming a mountain hermit, and then it being unaddressed for 25 years. Now, we live in a world with an oversaturation of reboots and revivals and sequels, but the reason most of those suck is that there's no story to tell. It's just a cash grab, and I think that the right team or idea for a Pokemon Red sequel would perfectly work. Because I think that it's about continuing the story. It's not the Obi-Wan Kenobi show where you start out with Obi-Wan Kenobi and figure it out from there. Now, there's a few ways we could go about this. If you like how it turns out, leave a comment. And if you hate how it turns out, leave a comment telling me how you'd go about it differently, because I think there's a ton of ways to pull this concept off, and I'm genuinely curious about how other people would go about this. Now I'm thinking that we focus on two things. One, story, obviously, but two, catching them all, as it was the catchphrase for Pokemon for a long period of time, and it just scratches that childhood itch. Even though we've reached over 1,000 Pokemon at this point, I think in this game we'll just focus on the first 251. We'd pick up where we left off with Red, on top of Mount Silver, where he's living in solitude with his Pokemon. I don't really care how much time has passed since Gen 2, but let's just say a few years and put Red in his late teens, or even early 20s if you really wanted to. So a bunch of familiar faces show up to see Red. Lance the Dragon Master, Bill, Oak, maybe Gold or Agatha shows up. But they're here to tell Red that the PC has gone offline. All the Pokemon that anyone had ever stored are missing and possibly dead, and Red's famous Pikachu, Snorlax, and Lapras were inside at the time. Now, for any layman's watching, when collecting and training Pokemon, a trainer can only hold 6 Pokemon on their person at any given time, and all other Pokemon are digitized and held as data in the PC storage system developed by Bill, the Pokemon researcher. Now here's where the catching focus comes in. Red goes and immediately gets the PC back online, but the data is damaged and corrupt, so the only way to restore it is to catch all the Pokemon and complete their damaged data, and return all the lost digitized Pokemon to their trainers. I think the best way to accomplish this would be to have the Overworld sprites for the Pokemon, similar to Sword and Shield, as well as a special Bill ball that basically works as a Master Ball so you don't have to throw 1,000,000 balls at that dang old Dunsparce. Also, as tradition, I want to stick something dumb in the Pokédex.
And the Pokédex was fine, it didn't need a radio.
A Pokemon sensor. A little notification pops up to say, "Hey moron, there's a Dunsparce right behind you. You better get it." What, you think you're too good for Dunsparce? Actually, you don't deserve Dunsparce, you jerk. I know I'm adding a bit here, but here's the thing. We're collecting all 251 Pokemon. I want to streamline this process, but still make it feel like an accomplishment so we can get them sweet little dopamine hits when we catch a Shuckle. Some catchable Pokemon will only be caught to advance the story. I can easily see a mission where Lance has you catch a Dratini or something, a mission with Mr. Fuji or Agatha related to ghost types, a mission where you save Whitney's mean cow. And that's where I want to introduce choice. Because some of you are surely thinking, I don't want to save the mean cow. It was mean to me as a child. And I agree. Like I said at the top of the video, Silver was my first Pokemon game. I too had to contend with the mean cow when I was still small enough to think that a Happy Meal must cost $1 million for just the toy alone. I think implementing a branching narrative to a certain degree would be the raddest thing imaginable. We're playing as an older Red, and the older you get, you have to deal with hard choices. Right off the Zubat, I think the first battle should be unwinnable every time to set up the first choice. Now you might be wondering how starters would work in this. Red has been training his Pokemon on a mountain. He has Pokemon. So I think maybe we take 3. A Kanto starter, a Johto starter, and an Eevee that can evolve into any of the first 5 evolutions. Once you have your Pokemon and you're ready to start on your journey, Red will run into Blue, Green, Mr. Turquoise, but he's not the snarky Jurgov you once knew. He's grown and changed. You have a battle for old time's sake, and lose. I already said that. You'll always lose. But Turquoise doesn't say, "Smell you later, loser," like he did when we were kids. He'll say something like, "No worries, man. Just a bit of ring rust. We all get it from time to time," and reaches out for a handshake. This is when you will get to choose whether you have a classic mean rival if you deny his handshake, or the new style of friendly rival if you accept his handshake. I also think it'd be cool if this changed the difficulty. Pokemon games don't have difficulty settings, but it'd be kinda dope if friend rival was normal and mean rival was hard. This also affects catching them all. If you have a friendly rival, he'll occasionally just give you an Abra or something. But If you have a Meanie Pants rival, you'll have to battle for that Abra. Other choices would have long-term effects. Keeping Whitney's mean cow would make it so the residents of Johto dislike Red and don't embrace the former champion as the man to come and save everyone's Pokemon. While returning, it would make them love you, perhaps having them donate unknowns to you until you get the full alphabet, and when you get the full alphabet, a freaking Celebi, baby! And if they hate you, a crazy gauntlet match at the ruins of Alph, similar to an Elite Four run, but if you win, you get all the unknowns at once, triggering you to catch Celebi. Another big choice I had in mind was whether you keep or release your legendaries. You'll need them all to complete the Pokédex, but if you keep the legendaries, natural disasters will wipe Cinnabar Island and the Sevi Islands off the map. Innocent lives taken. But if you have all the legendaries, and you keep them in this version, they'll be breedable. So you can make baby legendaries and maybe even shiny legendaries. But if you release them all, they'll come to you and reward you with shiny versions of any 2 Pokemon in your party. Now, I think I've laid enough bare bones to write a former hero comes out of hiding to save the day story. But that's kind of a boring story, even with some of the branching elements I've suggested. So I figured we'd focus on Red himself. He couldn't handle the pressure of being champion, but he still loves Pokemon, so that should be what we focus on. First off, unlike older Pokemon games, Red should obviously have dialogue. He should be a little standoffish, but not rude, when interacting with people, and the sweetest, kindest person in the world when he's with his Pokemon. I'd love some scattered scenes throughout of moments where Red's just hanging out with his team, eating dinner, singing songs, mending minor wounds maybe. It would be friggin' adorable. And I think this is where the branching path works perfectly. It becomes a story of collaboration versus consolidation. Red knows there are issues in this Pokemon world, but will he team up with his former rival and put aside past grudges against mean cow ladies and let power flow freely through that onion-shaped fairy, or will Red be reactionary and insular? Will he reignite rivalries, steal stupid cows, and keep all power in his own hands because he truly believes his hands are the safest? Well, that'll be up to you, the player. Either way, in the end, we will have all kept the promise we made to ourselves as children and catch them all. Look, if you enjoyed this, give it a like and subscribe for more. I gotta go figure out how the Elite Four contributes to the local economy of Kanto, so I'll see you guys next time. Peace.